Gibson was the local studio to go to. Everyone that had photos to be taken, if it was weddings, christening, birthdays, whatever, Gibson was the place to go.
I started at Gibson Photographers back in the 70s. I started off to work there for 6 weeks and ended up for 35 years.
I came across what now has come to be known as the Gibson collection, and I thought it sounded interesting. Turned out to be an awful lot of negatives from the 1950s and even more from the 1960s, and quite a substantial number from the 1970s.
I came to England when I was 25 years old. That was 1955.
In 1974, I came to London.
Came to England, I think probably about 1961.
I arrived in Southampton after 16 days on the boat. I was happy to be in England, really, really happy.
I was staying with my uncle and my brother and my sister-in-law and niece in Clapton.
I got pregnant and I decided after I was pregnant, I'm going to send for my children because I left 4 children at home.
This was like the first time that I seen my parents because we lived with our grandparents. Back in the days, that was the done thing. Your parents used to go abroad, find work, accommodation, and so forth. And then once they've got themselves settled, they'll send for you.
Migrants were arriving, getting settled, getting employment, settling into Hackney, and then having photographs of themselves taken to send back to family in their home countries.
It was nice how the customers would refer to things differently as well, so you had to learn a different language, like when somebody would come in and go, do you want a ping pong? And that actually meant, do you want a passport photograph?
Ron Gibson, he was a self-taught photographer.
If you were taking a photograph of somebody, Ron would have to work out what their likes and dislikes were, and then they would go, well, I need to see all my body in the photograph, not half of it, because if you showed them a photograph of only half of them, or just 3/4, they'd go, well, you've cut my legs off. And I can't send this home because they'll think I haven't got any legs. So it was very important to have like pens in their pockets. The more pens that they had meant that they'd really achieved something.
One of the reasons why we went to studios, because obviously the cameras back in the days, they weren't all that good.
Picture is coming better than what we take the photograph.
We would have a diary that would be completely filled and then go either onto the next page or a little bit rubbed into the corner to get the information in.
Gibson was the place to go. Again, obviously, because it's just in Low Clapton Road, that's all that we knew, and that's where we went.
Gibson's customer base is quite different from where he started. If you look at the 1950s images, it's clear that he's serving a white working class population. By the mid-1970s, he's not. It's a different kind of population. It's migrant populations, primarily Afro-Caribbean and Asian people, and they're having different types of photograph taken.
We used to love to dress sharp. I don't know if you'd say we used to show off, but we used to think we were the business. When we went out, it was nothing than looking sharp. Everything about you looked good, as you can see by this photograph. I was probably about 18. In the seam of the flares, it used to open, and we used to put like a different type of material inside of it so that when you walked, you would see this brightly colored material in the actual flares.
By taking photographs, you can see how fashion changes over the years, from having the flares or to the miniskirts and their trendy suits. Every week was something different, which was good because no 2 weeks were the same, from photographing maybe somebody's baby, or it may have been somebody's wedding.
And bar mitzvahs and events.
I would be with these piles in front of me of this work, and all these different weddings and all these different nationalities, and yet they were the same set of photographs for each of them.
He has about half a dozen poses, particularly for weddings, and the same sorts of poses appear time and time again, right from 1952 through to the mid-1970s. A typical one is bridegroom waiting outside the church with his best man. Either they're shaking hands or the bridegroom's looking nervous and checking his watch. If you took away the fashion and the fact that it's black and white or colour film, it could be from any period. Exactly the same repertoire right the way through.
The studio stayed with the same chairs and the same tables, having the sort of like the browny orangey curtains and the creamy tabletops and so on, or the dark floor. Whoever coming in, you didn't have to change so much very quickly. It was only the people in the photographs that you would actually just have to position.
I had about one is with my wife, and I got my own 4 photographs that was in the black and white. I took my mother there, and she had a photograph, and they took lovely photograph. She always smiling. She was always smiling.
What we called wet printing, from having a roll of film in a camera, it meant at the end of it you needed to develop the film to see the photographs.
Once you took a photograph back in the days, it wasn't a case of you could view it as in straight away. You had to go back to the studio, have a look, and then if it had taken, say, half a dozen shots, depending on how many you had wanted, you would then have to choose and say, well, okay, I like, say, 3 or 4 out of how many he had taken.
And then you would come back a few days later and pick your photographs up. So the whole process in all took about a week. Ron was lovely. He was such a gentleman, and no customer, whether they were spending £10 or £110, they all got treated the same.
He's always mixed with the people, you know, and very nice. Just sit down here, you get a good photograph, and that he always say when the Asian people go to photograph, he always say, just smile like he speak our language, hasso.
He built up such a good relationship with all of them, and he would talk to them by first name, and they would all call him Ron, and he knew what people wanted.
Looking at the photos, it really takes me back to that day when Lane, my best friend, she got married to Eric. The wedding was in August 1977. My most vivid memory of that day was how beautiful Mid Lane looked. She was impeccably dressed, as always, but she had makeup on, and it was the first time in her life she'd ever worn makeup. Her big sister Evelyn, who we all call Sis, insisted, because Sis was very glamorous and she was a part-time model, she insisted for the photographs that Lane would have makeup. So Lane had false eyelashes, she had blusher on, and she had lipstick on. And she felt very uncomfortable, she said, but she looked beautiful. So after the ceremony, we went home to her place for the reception, and she just scrubbed it all off.
I go to church on a Saturday. I don't do any work. But because of her wedding, I went to church and then went to her wedding and then went back to church.
All the family had the photograph from Gibson. Even my sister got the married, she got the photograph from Gibson on the Hackney Town Hall.
Ron always told me that to have a photograph was like having an item of furniture. You'd only have it maybe a year. A photograph you would have for a lifetime, and it's very important to have that, because you can't have a memory to show somebody. That memory's only ever with you.
The population changes, but the important events that people want to record don't change.